Out to Washington. Remember, we spoke at length yesterday with some of our reporters and experts about an idea proffered by President Trump on Truth Social yesterday. He would like to do away with mail-in voting via executive order. Fox's Connor Hansen has a closer look.
President Trump says he plans to do away with both mail-in voting and voting machines. His announcement didn't sit well with some state election officials who say it's not up to him.
I don't work for you, Donald Trump. I work for the people of the state of Arizona.
This is an attempted power grab by Donald Trump. He is attacking democracy, and we will not let him win. Mail ballots are secure. They cannot be hacked by foreign adversaries.
This week, President Trump said he is working on an executive order to make the changes. The Constitution allows states to decide how to run their elections, and only Congress can make changes to federal elections.
I'm sure there will be many discussions with our friends on Capitol Hill and also our friends in state legislatures across the country to ensure that we're protecting the integrity of the vote for the American people.
Mail-in voting is used by about 1/3 of all U.S. voters, and different forms of voting machines are used in almost all voting jurisdictions. President Trump suggested a more reliable alternative.
Paper ballots are very sophisticated with the watermark paper and everything else. We would get secure elections. We'd get much faster results.
In June, a federal judge blocked an executive order requiring voters to prove they are U.S. citizens and to prevent states from counting mail-in ballots after Election Day. The Trump administration is appealing. In New York, Connor Hansen, Fox News.
Connor, thanks so much. From New York there to the city of brotherly love in Philadelphia, hearing from Pennsylvania Governor, the Democrat Josh Shapiro, on the president's idea. He posted this on his social media accounts. Let's listen.
Donald Trump can sign whatever the hell executive orders he wants to sign and make a show out of whatever he wants, but he can't change the Constitution with an executive order. And the Constitution gives the authority to set our election rules to the states. Let me remind you that it was just about 5 years ago that a bipartisan majority in the House and in the Senate passed mail-in voting. And during that time, millions of people have voted by mail. And we have had free and fair, safe and secure elections. Donald Trump has won some of those elections. He has lost some of those elections. Democrats have won some. Republicans have won some. For him to try and put more misinformation out there, to stoke more division and fear amongst people who want to exercise their constitutional right to pick the leaders in their communities and in their Commonwealth, that is just cynical and wrong. And Donald Trump can sign whatever executive order he wants. It will have absolutely no bearing on our elections here in Pennsylvania. And we will once again have free and fair, safe and secure elections led by Republican and Democratic clerks of elections in each of our 67 counties. People will be able to vote by mail, or people will be able to vote in person.
And back on live there to the White House, of course, it's been much speculated that Shapiro could be, come 2028, one of the key presidential contenders on the Democratic side. So right now, let's replay for you a conversation I had about this very issue last night. Let's listen. So let's dive into some of the claims, the many claims the president is making with our friend there at Votebeat, Jessica Huseman, who knows all about this. She joins me. Jessica, I think we could spend like the next hour just on this Truth Social post that I read out, because it is long and there's a lot in it. So let's kind of go line by line with it. The president wants to sign an executive order that would both do away with mail-in voting and also do away with the tabulation part of it, getting rid of electronic voting machines. You and I have discussed before, the purview of how you run elections is completely up to the state. The president thinks he has authority here, does he?
He does not, no, and I think the Constitution is pretty clear about this. Article 1 gives the time, place, and manner of elections and how to conduct them to states. And so President Trump literally has no ability to affect this in any way. There's very little Congress or the presidency, either branch, can do to affect things here.
So let's talk about some of the alternatives. Say we did away with the nationwide electronic tabulation with machines. How would we count votes?
Well, I mean, I think that you would take a chapter out of the book of lots of different very red states and counties that have tried to hand count ballots in the last couple of years. So, for example, Gillespie County, Texas, which is a pretty small Texas county in central Texas, required 200 volunteers to count ballots for the midterms last year, right? So this is a fraction of the ballots that are cast in the general election, and that's how many hands it takes to count ballots by hand without any machinery, right? Like, we've created computers in order to expedite things and make them more efficient and more reliable, and he's asking us to do away with that here.
You know, what's somewhat, counterintuitive to me, or maybe counterproductive, is the president is under the impression that if you did away with electronic tabulation, that you would still get a faster result by presumably hand counts.
You absolutely wouldn't. We know this. There have been dozens of academic studies. Votebeat stayed up all night watching folks hand count in Gillespie County as it happens. And what we found is that it took them hours and hours and hours longer than it would have taken computers. They were far less efficient, far less accurate. And at the end of the night, they still had to go back and spend several more hours quality checking everything. If they had just used the available technology that makes this process easier, they wouldn't have had to do that.
So let's talk about mail-in voting now. You heard there in Lauren Clark's report, the president says, we're the only country to do it now. A lot of countries have gotten rid of it. She rattled off some of the countries that still use it. About 34 use it worldwide here. President Trump, and it's well documented, well known, he doesn't like mail-in voting. He thinks it's rife with fraud, or the opportunity for fraud. Let's dive into that claim. If you vote by mail, if you send your ballot in the mail, are you more susceptible to fraud, or is the candidate more susceptible to fraud who's on the ballot? Help us make sense of that.
No, I mean, I think that he's made this up entirely out of whole cloth. There have been academic studies that show that there's no partisan advantage to vote by mail, that there is no material difference in the amount of voter fraud or intimidation or election taking advantage any way you please that happens with vote by mail as opposed to voting in person. And in fact, as you mentioned, right, he has said that we're the only country that still does this. That is absolutely false. There are countries in the in the EU and in other parts of the world that have taken advantage of vote by mail for quite some time. Germany, for example, has had it since the 1950s. Everyone in Switzerland, for example, is given a ballot by mail, and they're all given the opportunity to return it by mail, and about 70% of their population takes advantage of that. So to state that any country has done away with this as a result of fraud, or that the United States is the last remaining country to be using vote by mail is just false.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to get in the psyche of the president. Maybe he's just blowing off steam. We know how he feels about elections and quote unquote election integrity. But you mentioned that, vote by mail doesn't necessarily benefit one party over the other here. But let's talk about the voters who do choose to vote by mail. Does that skew along partisan lines more in one favor than the other?
Not necessarily, right? Okay. So, for example, I am talking to you from the state of Texas, and the state of Texas, for example, only allows people over the age of 65 to vote by mail. And so obviously that skews much more Republican than the average person in Texas. States like Arizona allow most of the population to vote by mail, but that's not really what all states do. And so depending on who states allow to vote by mail and how long they allow vote by mail to happen, it could skew one way or the other. But on average, across the country, it does not disproportionately advantage one party or the other.
So, Jessica, I'm trying in good faith to kind of get into the psyche of the president and his supporters who do think mail-in voting is rife with fraud or the possibility of fraud here. Now, they would contend that because you put your ballot in the mailbox, the mailman comes and gets it. Presumably, a lot of hands are on it before it gets processed and tabulated, that is where it could be tampered with. Do I have that right? That's what they think.
I mean, I have over the years heard a bunch of different and basically contradictory reasons as to why vote by mail should be more risky than any other way of voting, right? A number of hands are on it, not enough hands are on it. It goes through the mail. We can't see it. We see too much of it, right? There's not a lot of logical consistency in terms of why people feel like there is more fraud in the mail versus elsewhere. Certainly, academic studies show that there's not a material difference in the method of voting at all.
And so kind of the irony of this was, before Trump dominated the political scene and came down the golden escalator in Trump Tower, mail-in voting was really the product of the Republican Party apparatus, was it not? It was highly encouraged by Republicans.
It absolutely was. And it, in fact, was sort of the brainchild of the Republican Party of old, right? So states like Arizona and Utah and Florida are the ones that have really created the policy structure of vote by mail, which we find ourselves in today. And these are all Republican states. Quite a lot of the sort of impetus for vote by mail was around giving older voters more flexibility in how they cast their ballots, whether it was from home or from elsewhere. And for quite a long time, older voters have been more Republican than your average voter.
Yeah, just lastly, I mean, if the president does go through with this and signs this executive order, you already kind of alluded to the fact that almost immediately some federal judge somewhere is going to stop this after parties sue to stop it. That's pretty inevitable, right? Because this line here saying, remember, the states are merely an agent for the federal government counting and tabulating the votes. I would imagine a lot of federal judges would like to fixate on that very line in this post here.
Yeah, I think that they probably would. And then also, this is very diametrically opposed to the orthodoxy of the Republican Party over the last multiple decades, right? In 2000, in 2004, in 2008, in 2020, all of these massive national sort of voter reforms were opposed by the Republican Party because they said, listen, voting is up to the local authority, to the local municipalities, to the state governments. A federal takeover is not what this country wants, nor is it what the Constitution requires. And so what President Trump is saying in this Truth Social post very explicitly goes against that prevailing orthodoxy over the last multiple generations. And that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, and we'll see whether or not this is actually signed as an executive order. He says he intends to, and whether or not it will be challenged in the courts. Jessica Huseman with Votebeat, thanks so much for your time tonight. Talk soon.